of your theory, did you say that there have been no new species created since the creation?
No, I would say there have been no new kinds created. As far as species, the Great Dane or the Chihuahua is probably a phenomena of the last 500 years. They probably did not have any Chihuahuas 500 years ago. But is a Chihuahua a new species? Well, it's kind of a subspecies.
We call them all dogs the same species.
Yeah.
I mean new species like the frog, for example.
Right. There's a whole bunch of varieties of frogs. I don't know how many different varieties, but that's where I would be very cautious to stick with the word kind, not species.
Well, by species, we define it as interbreeding. Yeah. So there's
I don't know that I would even go.
There's nothing new since creation.
I would not go with that definition.
Nothing significantly new.
Yeah, nothing significantly new. Interfertile may not be the divisional line between the kinds. You might be able to take a horse and a zebra and get them to interbreed. You may be able to get, some have argued that they've been able to get a cat and a dog. I've not seen any proof of that. That kind of stuff appears in Inquirer magazine from time to time, you know, that a dat or a cog is born. But they argue that you can get a lion and a tiger, a liger. I think that's been done and fairly well documented. But stand away and look at it. They're both the same kind of animal. You know,
so many species have disappeared since then, but none have been created. None have evolved since then.
Many species have disappeared, and some complete kinds may have disappeared. Probably the Tyrannosaurus rex. I would say, within the first few thousand years, if you could kill a T-Rex, you would be a hero. They'd tell stories about you around the campfire. And the story gets blown out of proportion with the telling of it, and pretty soon he's got, you know, breathing fire and flying around and, you know, big as a mountain. But I think the basis of the story was in historical fact. They were killing off dinosaurs.
The Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs.
Oh, that's true.
Does it really?
In the book of Job.
Have a reference?
Oh yeah, Job is right in the center of the Bible, just before the book of Psalms. Job chapter 40 and verse number 15 talks about Behemoth. It says Behemoth is the chief of the ways of God. The Hebrew word there is the biggest. That would, I think, probably be the Brachiosaurus. It says he moves his tail like a cedar tree. Well, it had a tail like a cedar tree. Some reference Bibles will say Behemoth was an elephant hippopotamus. You got to understand, in 1841, the bones were put together of the first reconstructed dinosaur. 1841. King James Version of the Bible was translated in 1611. So if dinosaurs were nearly extinct 1,000 years ago, let's say for all practical purposes they're totally extinct, people forgot about them. During the Dark Ages, the knowledge of dinosaurs and dragons was lost. First-hand knowledge. They're gone. They died out 500 years earlier. When they start putting the bones together in the 1800s, the people said, wow, when did this animal, where did this come from? So it was a golden opportunity to try to teach, well, maybe they lived millions of years ago. Actually, it was in the 1800s that the word prehistoric was invented. The word prehistoric will not be in a dictionary from the 1700s.
Would you say dinosaurs were around during the time of the Roman Empire?
I think they were, and I have some pictures on, I got 6, 7 carousels full of slides. Roman mosaics have been found showing dragons fighting, long-necked dinosaurs. Paintings found in caves in Africa, even scratchings in the walls of the Grand Canyon depict dinosaurs. Legends by the thousands, of course, persist of dinosaurs, or what I would consider dinosaur. They call them dragons normally, the typical designation of it. Many of the ancient ships' logbooks talk about dragons or sea monsters. Captain Peter McKay, HMS Daedalus, here's the whole account right here. He and his whole crew watched for 20 minutes as a sea monster swam under their boat. The sailors begged him. They said, Captain, don't write this in the logbook. We're just going to get laughed at, even though they all saw it. I mean, there are thousands of stories like that out there. And there are books up here in your library, you know, about Loch Ness Monster and Lake Champlain Monster. There have been 21 expeditions now to Africa. Right. Largest swamp in the world is the Likawala Swamp in Africa, 55,000 square miles, which makes it bigger than the whole state of Florida. That swamp, Dr. Roy Mackle, University of Chicago, microbiology professor, he's been over there twice. He's going again this month or next month. His phone number and address is right here. Call him up. After his 2 trips in 1980 and 81, a movie was made called Baby, about the possibility of dinosaurs still living in the African swamp. Now, I'm not saying they're everywhere and they're running around Pensacola, but it's a big world. You get a swamp as big as Florida that's nearly uninhabited, Matter of fact, the Congo government that owns it said it's 80% unexplored. They've flown over it and mapped it, but that's not exploring it.
If it's such a big world that we can miss dinosaurs, then maybe we're missing some new species that you claim aren't happening. I mean, how do we know that we know all the species that are there and we don't know the new ones if we don't know the old ones either? I mean,
here you're arguing from lack of evidence again.
Whoa,
you're arguing from a negative position. Yes,
you're telling me that there's, I know the name of that thing, Moncolo mbebe might be out there, and it's reasonable to assume that. But you're also saying that we know for sure that there's no new species.
Oh, I didn't say there's no new species. There's probably a lot of stuff yet to be discovered.
You said there haven't been any new species since the flood. You told me
there haven't been any new kinds, would be my argument.
What is a kind?
That's a nebulous term. What is a species, for that matter? Nobody's got a good definition of species either.
What's a great definition of species?
You'll be the first one to know it.
Look it up. Everybody's got it in the back. Look it up in the little anthropology book there. It's got a definition of species.
You get 50 different anthropologists or biologists to define the word species. You come up with 50 different definitions.
Gee, the only one I've ever heard is that it's an interbreeding population.
That's the only one I've ever heard.
That's the only one I've ever heard.
Is a Chihuahua and a Great Dane the same species?
Sure.
Yes.
They're listed as the same species. You look at them there.
Okay, but I would be cautious about, from my standpoint, of using the word species. I'm going to stick with the word kind, which may be something more like family. I think a dog and a coyote. Is a dog and a coyote the same species?
No, same genus though.
Are they interfertile?
Sure.
Well, why aren't they the same species? Your definition says they're
They
interfertile.
don't have to be. It's an interbreeding population. If they start to interbreed, if you had 300 dogs and 300 coyotes and put them on an island for 6 months, you got it. That's your population right there.
So your definition of species is flexible then?
No, it's not. It's an interbreeding population. That's the definition.
Well, the dogs in Florida are not interbreeding with the dogs in Hawaii right now.
They can though.
Yeah, but they're not.
But they can if they have to. That's the whole point.
Well, say if dogs and coyotes are different species, just because they don't happen to be interbreeding at the moment, you got arguing both sides of this coin.
Not at all.
Yeah,
no, the only definition I think anybody here has ever heard for species is this an interbreeding population of organisms. It's the only one we've ever heard. I've never heard 50 different kinds. I've never heard anybody argue about that.
Well, my dog, then, is not the same species as any dog, because he's been neutered and can't interbreed with anything. So.
Well, he's not a population either. You only got one. But I've never heard this argument you're claiming is out there. I've never heard this difference of
Well, I think we're off on a real minor rabbit trail, but
no, you're slipping by all these absolutes that aren't really absolute. You're telling me there might be dinosaurs out there, and you're also telling me that we know that there have been no new kinds happening. If it's such a damn big world, then how do we know all the kinds? I mean, it's pretty silly to say we know what's not out there.
I can say no scientist has ever observed a new kind of animal.
Gee, talk to a microbiologist. They're making new kinds of microorganisms all the time.
They're making varieties of old ones.
Oh, I bet.
They're making some that are resistant to certain bacteria, but it's still, resistant to certain drugs. It's still the same basic kind.
Oh, it is?
Stand 50 feet back and look at it. It is obviously not a tomato or a hamster.
They put human genes into plant cells. You tell me that a mixture of human and plant genetics is not a new kind?
Is it fertile? Does it reproduce itself?
It does.
Part human, part plant.
It's carried. That's how they're making vaccines. That's how they're making antibodies. They use monkey tissue to make the vaccine the World Health Organization used for smallpox.
Oh,
They
yeah.
grew the virus in monkey tissue because it's got monkey genetics. Hey, that's a human vaccine. You squirt it in a human, you don't get smallpox.
Oh, yeah.
That's that bacteriophage has never existed before. It's never carried those genes before.
It's still a bacteria.
No, it's not. That's
What
the
is
whole
it?
point. Who knows what it is? It's a half bacteria, half something else.
So you're saying, here's your argument. With human
No,
intervention...
it's not an argument. It's just what it is. I'm not arguing the point. I'm just saying there it is. You know.
Here's your point. With human intervention...
A creator intervened and made it.
With intelligent input, you can mix two things together that formerly would not mix together and create something new.
Sure.
I would say that's what the Creator did initially. He created things out of nothing initially, created some basic kinds, and without any intelligent intervention, there are no new kinds that have been observed. Never been observed that a new kind of animal. And the animals that do breed tend to stay within the same kind of animal. Dogs produce some kind of dog. Horses produce some kind of horse. And much of the evidence that's presented in I'll call it kind, but much of the evidence presented in our textbooks, for instance, the evolution of the horse from Eohippus to Equus, has been disproven many years ago.
Right.
But it is still presented to the high school kids.
Gee, it wasn't presented to me when I was in high school.
I've got the books. I photocopied out of the books. I don't know what books you got.
You must have gone. I don't know where these people are going to high school, but it wasn't presented to me, and that was a long time ago.
Come to my house, 1 block north Pensacola Christian High School, and I'll show you my huge collection of textbooks, and I can assure you, I can point out many things that have been proven wrong years ago that are still in the textbooks.
Well, so are we arguing with the theory or arguing with the textbook printers? I mean, they're not the guys that are coming up with the evolutionary theory. They're the guys that are writing high school textbooks.
Oh, yeah, the guys that are writing.
There's an argument with not evolutionary theory. We got an argument with textbook publishing companies.
I think we need to argue with textbook publishing companies
Sure, so
and
I mean,
selection committee. As far as the general theory, it is a philosophical worldview. It is not observable. You don't observe any changes from one kind to another.
No, absolutely.
Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about your dates. You're changing the time length of the flood, and yet all your dates are according to the Bible, so how can we accept it?
Wait. I'm changing the time length of the flood.
You have the flood as being 12 months long, whereas in the Bible, it's 40 days and 40 nights.
No, the rain was 40 days and 40 nights, but the flood the rain only lasted 3 days in Iowa, but the flood lasted months, or a month.
Does it actually state that the flood lasted for 12 months?
The dates given in the Bible say 12 months. 150 days, the flood water was coming up, for 150 days, this was happening. You can read Genesis 7 and add up the numbers given there. Noah was in the ark for 40 days. The rain was 40, I agree. But the flood was a year. That's not a I'm not changing anything. Those are from the dates given there. Okay? Other questions?
We didn't see it, so how can we say that?
Historical evidence. The guy who caused it wrote it down. The guy who caused it to be written down. God did. Have you ever met Abraham Lincoln?
Well, but you have to believe in that. That's a belief.
Do you believe in Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, who you've never seen?
No.
See, that's where you go from historical evidence to empirical evidence.
But you've never seen, your great-grandfather, so he probably didn't exist.
He existed. I have a historical evidence. I don't have empirical evidence. I have historical evidence. That's where evolution gets into trouble.
You choose to believe the reporters. If they're not lying.
If they're lying, we're all in trouble, right?
Right.
Sure. Maybe we're not in America. Maybe we're in France right now, But historical evidence versus empirical testable evidence. And evolution has neither. Yes?
Other people's historical evidence that contradicts these kinds of things. How about like the Sumerians who say that we were created by that human beings were created out of these Neanderthal types as a result of trying to create primitive workers, and that the flood was a result of a planetary collision in prehistoric times. That's tremendous historical evidence, and it's all over the place. And what about that?
Okay, good point.
Their evidence.
Sure. After this flood, 400 years ago, after the flood, the people that survived had children and grandchildren, and they diversified into the different cultures that we see today, and most folks would agree that the population of the world seems to have started somewhere around the Mesopotamian Valley, Iraq and Iran, which would fit perfectly with the Bible account. Within a few generations, they're telling stories to their kids and their grandkids, and the stories get blown out of proportion, and today there are 250 different flood accounts. The Sumerians have one, the Babylonians have one, the Chinese have one, the Indians have one, and many of them agree in many of the details. Most of the flood accounts will say a family was saved in a boat. Now, how big was the boat and how many were in the family? The details vary, but I think that's typical of mythology as it changes. But to me, the creator that made this whole place would be smart to preserve a record for us and to make sure that we do have the truth. Why on earth would he make the whole thing and then just leave it alone? I think he has taken great pains to preserve the biblical account for us. Lots of folks have died so we could have that.
What is your explanation of the survival of your historical document surviving?
What is my explanation of the...
How did it survive?
How did the Bible survive?
Through the medieval period, since we lost everything else.
Well, we didn't lose everything in the medieval periods. There were things preserved.
The Carolingian period, is that what supposedly the Bible survived from, the transcriptions of the Bible? Is that the period that you think it survived?
Well, no, I think it survived from shortly after this flood. People knew how to write all through history. There's never been a time when people didn't know how to write. Archaeology says everybody has always known how to write.
Is that the original document?
Oh, no, the original documents. I think it would be smart.
Where's the survival of your historical documents?
Well, to me, God knowing, my interpretation of this would be, God knows people tend to worship artifacts and things like this. There's enough slivers of the original cross. Every Catholic priest has one. You could build 5 cities if you put all them slivers together. Obviously somebody doesn't have the original one.
That one's not true. I'm a Catholic priest. I don't have one.
You don't have one? You didn't get one? They used to give them one, didn't they?
No, never have. There are supposedly, but that's not a good statement.
He's got a little different Bible, so we got to find out which Bible. He's got a Belgian and yeah, how can we leave out his hunk of the Bible? What was wrong with that? I don't know.
All right. Which is probably another rabbit trail we may want to not go off on.
Believe me, rabbit trails, I'm not too sure about that. I mean, going off on, she's got an excellent point here. If it's based on a historical survival of documentation, where's this, how do you get this chain of documents? I mean, you're saying everybody has myths. Sumerians have myths, blah, 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 blah. However, if you look at it historically, the Sumerians are writing down their myths before the Christians are writing down anything. They were writing down stuff before there were any Christians. So maybe everybody's copying their myths.
That's not a good way to put it.
All cultures had a flood myth. It did happen. But I just want to know where the survival of your historical documents come from for this to be the view, your view. I mean, if we're all basing everything on fact, where is the survival?
Right, and going off into that part of this argument may be beyond the scope of what Dr. Lee wants here as far as anthropology class, okay? I think I could argue the historical preservation of the Bible all through time. But that's a little different. To stick with the creation-evolution argument, was there a creator? Was the world created? And whether if you want to argue the historical accuracy of the Bible, that's, I think, a different subject than the creation-evolution argument. I don't base my belief in creation totally on the Bible. My belief that the world is not millions of years old is founded on scientific evidence. Let me give you just a little bit of it and let you analyze that. It is a fact that the world is spinning. I don't know too many folks would disagree with that. It is a fact the world spins about 1,046.6 miles an hour at the equator. Not too many folks disagree with that. It is also a fact that the world is slowing down. This year, 1994, we're going to have leap second. You can call 1-900-410-TIME and find out when it's going to be. Every year and a half or 2 years, we will have to have a leap second. I've got the articles in my suitcase of the previous ones. January 1st, December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1990, was a leap second. I'm going to put December 31st of 90 was a leap second. June 30th of 92 was a leap second. It's Astronomy Magazine. You can look these dates up, and that's a fact. The Earth is slowing down. So I'm going to put that in the fact column. The Earth's spin is slowing. About 1,000th of a second per day seems to be the reasonable average. Okay, if the world is slowing down, then obviously it used to be going faster. That's fairly reasonable. How much faster could it go before it would totally upset the ecological systems down here? Could the days and nights be 9 hours, like Jupiter? 9 hours, 55 minutes total?
No, because you said there was a 24-hour day that you believed in the creation, so those hours are the same all the time, and it can't be slowing down.
I think the hours would have been maybe 23 and a half hours for a day.
That's 4,000 years. If you take out a second every 4 years.
6,000 years ago, it was 23 hours and 25 minutes.
That's right, so there's a whole day gone right there.
No, it was only 35 minutes. But you're straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel.
You said there were
24-hour
days. Hours were the same as they were now. You said that when you started.
Okay, I apologize. They were not. They were 23 and a half hour days. Well, today we don't even have a 24-hour day.
That's right.
23 hours, 56 minutes, and 48 seconds. So, okay, they were one day, one's rotation of the Earth. If the world is billions of years old, the slowing spin of the Earth today indicates it can't be billions of years old. There's no possible way you can go back billions of years, adding 1,000th of a second per day. Now, whether it's linear or geometric, I don't know, but it does put some kind of time limit. It is a fact the world is slowing down. So for somebody to tell me the world is billions of years old, that's dreaming. That's scientifically impossible. It cannot be true. So this theory ought to be rejected just on that basis alone. Let me give you a few more.
But you don't know what the maximum RPM could be, so how can you say it can't be?
We know that plants are very sensitive to daylight hours.
Yeah, but the plants may not have been on it all. You're assuming there were plants from the instant it was created, so it's a tautological argument. You're assuming that...
So the plants evolved this time, they were able to...
Well, if there weren't any plants in the very first place, and it wouldn't matter how fast. If it was a real hot mass in the first place, which I don't happen to believe in, but the physics of it is pretty obvious. If it was a hot mass of goo at some point and then cooled down, it could be spinning like crazy if it was real hot. It wouldn't be any kind of at all.
I would say,
yeah, be losing mass, sure.
I would say the evidence that it was never a hot mass of goo is extremely strong. Physical evidence. If you want to get into physical science on that, that's what I taught was physics, okay, physical science. But let's cover just a few more. The Earth is slowing down. That's a fact. Here's another one. The moon goes around the Earth. Nobody argues with that. 243,000 miles away at apogee. The moon is receding. We are losing our moon. astronomers will tell you the moon is getting further away by 2 to 3 inches every year. It's leaving us. Well, if the moon is getting further away than it used to be, closer. You bring the moon back in closer, you got a problem because the moon causes the tides. The inverse square law says if you half the distance, you quadruple the attraction. So, 30 or 40 million years ago, the tides would have drowned everything on the Earth twice a day. That's just 30 or 40 million, not billions. You can't tell me dinosaurs were here 70 million years ago when the tides would have destroyed the world 20 million years ago. That's not common sense. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Well, are you assuming that the Earth is therefore stationary?
No, the Earth has always been spinning.
Well, but if you're saying if you go back and the moon would be closer to us, then aren't you assuming that the Earth is going to be in the same orbit position as well?
Right.
I mean, maybe the Earth is in...
Well, as far as the distance, no, I'm saying the distance between the Earth and the moon, as we waltz around the sun, you know, they pull each other out of orbit a little bit, but the distance between them is increasing. That's a fact.
Right.
Now, how do you interpret that fact?
Backwards, if what you're telling us now, since the moon is creeping away at the rate of 2 inches a year, that eventually it'll go away.
Right.
Well, I'm going to use your same techniques. I'm going to back calculate, and at one point the moon was hitting the Earth because you're saying it can't spin. It has to be spinning in order to slow down. Well, in order to be moving away, it has to be at some position in the first place. It could never have been in an orbit to move from and have to be on the surface of the Earth. The same thing with our temperature. If you go down in a coal mine, it gets hotter as you go down.
Stick with the spin of the moon.
Let's calculate the temperature back, and if you do that and say, gee, it's X amount of heat losing from the center out and go backwards like you're trying to do with this timeline, it'd be hot on the surface, and the moon would be sitting in the middle of Idaho somewhere like a big lump, and it would move out and move away at 2 inches a year, away you go. I mean, that's gradualism right there. Well, yeah, sure, but the whole idea of saying that we can't pick these things up in the middle and pick and choose which half we're going to look at. You can't extrapolate a process from the middle and say from an orbit, which we don't know, it's now moving 2 inches a year, therefore it's moving away. Well, okay, calculate backwards. That has to be zero at some point.
But see, the point it would be zero would be 20 to 30 million years ago. Or 50 million.
It's only 4,000 years old. That would be 30 million
which
years
fits
ago.
fine with the biblical account. If it was all created 6,000 years ago, the moon...
When it was created? In orbit or
I
on
can
the
calculate
surface?
back where it was. It was in orbit, but it wasn't. It was a little closer, not close enough to cause much difference. 6,000 years at 2 inches a year is insignificant. But when you try to say it's billions of years, it becomes very significant.
Well,
That's my point.
But that's gradualism. That's assuming that these processes, that's using the evolutionist view and saying that the processes happen gradually all the time.
Good point. Isn't that what they do on carbon dating? They watch carbon decay for 3 days in the laboratory and assume it happened for millions of years at that rate? It's the very same assumptions.
But that's what you're using. You're using the carbon dating curve to tell me about the moon and the age of the Earth. I mean, you can't say the data stinks when they use it for carbon-14, but it's great for the age of the Earth.
Oh, I'm in favor of carbon-14 dating. We haven't got into that yet. I'm in favor of that. I understand the assumptions it's based on and the limitations of it. And I think students ought to be taught that. This is why it doesn't work for certain objects. And if a student...
Look it up in a book. They tell you that right away.
Sure. I taught high school. You ought to see what's in the high school books. It is not that way. Okay.
Oh, man, it wasn't in my high school books.
All right. Let's stick with this. You said my point. I don't know if you purposely or not purposely missed my point.
Not at all.
Okay. No, I'm trying to be consistent here. The moon is leaving us. That's a fact. If you interpret that back in time, it does put a time limit. Either the Earth had to be stuck to the moon, or it was all created, already in orbit, and it's moved out a few miles. It certainly doesn't falsify the creationist viewpoint. The fact that the moon is moving would fit fine into the creationist viewpoint. It was created this distance, it's now a little more, big deal.
Could the moon not have been moving exponentially, though? I mean, gradualism works, uniformitarianism, works very well with a lot of things, but when you talk about the gravity, loss of gravity, if the Earth is slowing down, wouldn't the farther away the moon would get, the faster it would move? So possibly millions of years ago, it was not moving at 2 to 3 inches a year. It was maybe moving 2 to 3 inches per 100,000 years or 10,000 years.
Yes, that's why I mentioned, I don't know if it's a linear line back in, or geometric, or logarithmic progression.
You know the equations for gravity, and you know he's absolutely right that as the farther you get away, the weaker the gravity, so it will move farther. As the farther it goes, it'll move faster. It'll move much more slowly when it's closer, and it could sit there for billions of years and move 100 millionth of an inch a year, 100 millionth of an inch. As soon as it gets out there, wham, gravity starts to fade, and out it goes. That's perfectly consistent with the laws of gravity.
Get your calculator, Hovind, and figure that out. You'll find out that it puts a time limit of way less than billions of years. It couldn't, it doesn't fit the evolutionist time scale of 4.6 billion years ago and then life coming here 3 million years ago.
The evolutionists don't claim that the moon was put into orbit 4.6 billion years ago. They claim there's people out there that claim the moon was a capture, and they don't know the date of the moon. They're not claiming it was all made at once. The evolutionists don't say that for a minute. I don't even believe them, but I know they're not saying that.
Okay, I know the capture theory has been disproven mathematically numerous times. That's
the same mathematics that'll show you that it's not moving out at the same rate all the time, and that this
I understand that. Sure, the inverse square law.
Right. Choosing which hunks of the math we're going to believe here, and that's pretty shaky.
No. I'm just saying these are some facts. The moon is leaving us. That's all I said. My interpretation of the fact, I did not put in the fact column. I said this is the fact. Today, as we observe it, it's moving. It's leaving. How you want to interpret that is up to you. If you choose to interpret that it started on the surface of the Earth in Utah as a big lump and left us, or the Pacific Ocean, that kind of theory, the creationist would say there is not a problem with the creation viewpoint. If the world's only 6 or 7 or 10,000 years old, and the moon was created 220,000 miles away, and it's now 240,000 miles away, big deal. It has no effect. It is leaving us. That's a fact. Let me give you a few more. The sun is burning. As the sun burns, it throws off billions of tons every year of matter. It is losing mass. We observe it happening. Now, there's a great argument going of how does the sun burn? Is it by gravitational collapse, or is it by nuclear processes? The evolutionists assume it is by nuclear processes because of the severe problem that occurs if it is gravitational collapse. Nobody knows for sure what makes the sun burn. We do know as it burns, it's losing weight. Enormous amounts are flying off into space. Nobody questions that. It is losing mass. Sun loses mass. And consequently, it has been observed for 300 years that the sun appears to be losing diameter also. When they first began to measure the sun 300 years ago, Royal Observatory in Greenwich has kept careful records. The sun's diameter on a chart, on a graph of time over diameter, the sun has oscillated as, gas bubbles and things, whatever's going on in there. But the sun has had a general overall trend of shrinkage. The 300-year average indicates the sun is shrinking as much as maybe 5 feet every hour. This would lend credence to the fact that the sun is burning by gravitational collapse, plus the fact that there have been no neutrinos. If it is indeed a nuclear reaction, there ought to be neutrinos, and all the experiments in the deep wells have indicated no neutrinos. Now, that question is still being argued. I am fully aware of that. But the size has been decreasing. The mass has been decreasing. To the creationist, that's no problem. That's expected. To the evolutionist who wants me to think this process has been going on for billions of years, it becomes a serious problem. Be it logarithmic or linear, you still have a problem. You have a time limit. This universe cannot be billions of years old. So I see no reason to reject the 6 to 10,000 year date given in Scripture. There's no scientific reason to reject that, and I think there are some great scientific reasons to accept that. I think there are some great scientific reasons to reject evolution as far as the time scale. Time, billions of years, is really only the first obstacle that evolutionists must overcome. If this theory of the general theory of evolution would go something like this. Let me simplify it down and show you where my objection is. The general theory of evolution, as it is taught in the books, says 20 billion years ago, and some say 15, some say 25. We're going to pick 20 as a reasonable average, okay? Thank you, sir. The evolutionist is going to say 20 billion years ago, there was a Big Bang. Now, what exploded and where did it come from is a whole other argument. The creationist will get all in trouble. The evolutionist will say, well, you believe in the beginning God. Where did God come from? But the evolutionist starts off in the beginning dirt or matter, and they don't know where that came from. Really, both are philosophical worldviews, which is my whole point. We are teaching a religion to our kids in school. They say we can't have religion in the schools. We've already got it. Evolution is a religious worldview, the general theory of evolution. 20 billion years ago, something exploded. Now, where it came from, they don't know. 4.6 billion years ago, Earth cooled down into the glob that it is today. I think there are many scientific problems with both of these, which I could go on for hours if you want, but then somewhere about 3 billion years ago, life arose from this dirt, rock, matter, non-living material. Life arose from non-living material. By some process, whether it's Miller's experiments or whatever, that's what is taught in our books. Life arose about 3 billion years ago. Really, it is spontaneous generation. No matter how you want to label it or color it or package it, they do believe and teach spontaneous generation.
The dust of the earth, it says that right in the Bible.
Sure. But the dust of the earth from the creation involves an intelligent creator. God can take the dust and put life in it. The dust itself cannot put life in itself. That's the big, big difference. Then, as things went along for 3 billion years, this life somehow began to reproduce.